A mail-order bride was delivered to a ghost town. Only one cowboy remained guarding it. The stagecoach left before she even got the trunk off the roof. That's the part I come back to. Driver didn't climb down, didn't tip his hat, didn't say a word of explanation. Just dropped the brake long enough for her to step off, and then the horses moved and the whole rig swung wide around the bend, and she was standing there in the middle of Main Street with a black trunk and a carpet bag and dust settling around her boots like it was welcoming her home. I was up on the hotel roof when it happened, fixing the fourth shingle I'd lost to the same damn windstorm, the one that had come out of the northwest 3 weeks prior and taken half of what was left of the mercantile sign with it. I had a mouthful of nails and a bad angle on the sun, and I wasn't paying attention to the road. Then I heard the coach, heard it stop, heard the trunk hit the street, and by the time I got turned around and looked down, she was standing there alone and the coach was already a dust cloud. I spit the nails into my hand. She wasn't moving, just standing there taking in the street, slow and deliberate, the way a person does when what they're seeing doesn't square with what they were told to expect. Her head went one direction, then the other. She looked at the hotel beneath me. It's the Callaway, or was, 4 stories of dark timber that's since gone gray as old bone. She looked at the livery across the way, at Hendrick's feed, at the barber shop with the window boards. Her back was to me so I couldn't read her face, but I watched her shoulders and they didn't drop. That was the thing. A lot of people, when they came to Harlan's Bluff and realized what it was now, their whole body caved, not hers. I said from up on the roof, "You'll want to step back a little." She turned, looked up, hand went to her hat against the light. "That's the Callaway," I said. "Front eave drips when there's been rain, and there's been rain." She looked at the eave, dry now. She looked at me. "I'm looking for a man named Aldous Prentice," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "I have a letter from him. I'm Clara Mabry from Columbus, Ohio. I was told to ask at the hotel." I put the nails in my shirt pocket and sat back on my heels, and I thought about how to answer that. There's no good way to answer it. "Aldous Prentice," I said, "left Harlan's Bluff in February. Most folks left in January, but he held on a little longer than most. He's in Prescott now, I believe, or was." She didn't say anything for a moment. "He didn't write to tell me." "No," I said, "I expect he didn't." I came down off the roof. Took my time with the ladder because my right knee has been bad since a horse fell on it 2 winters back, and I can't descend fast on it without the thing going sideways. By the time I got to the street, she'd set the carpet bag on the trunk and was looking at the hotel door. "Does it have rooms?" she said. "It has rooms," I said. "They're not what they were, but they're dry." "Then I'd like one." Her name was Clara Mabry, and she had traveled from Columbus by rail to Flagstaff, and then by stage for 2 days to a place that no longer existed in any meaningful sense, to marry a man who had already quit it without a word. She told me this in pieces over the first hour, not all at once, not as complaint, just as information passed between 2 people trying to understand a situation. I got her trunk inside. Showed her the room I'd been keeping up, the one on the 2nd floor with the window that faces east, which catches the morning light better than the others. There was a wash basin. The mattress was still good. I'd kept the room dusted, not because I expected company, but because letting things go to ruin bothered me in a way I couldn't name. She looked around the room. "There's no one else," she said, not a question. "No one else." "How long has it been like this?" "Mostly empty since September, fully empty since February except me." "And why are you still here?" I told her I'd been asking myself the same thing. That was the honest answer, and it wasn't entirely the whole one, but it was enough for then. The real answer, which I wasn't ready to give a stranger, was that my wife Margaret had been buried in the hillside cemetery above town, and I wasn't going to leave her up there alone while the desert took everything back. Margaret died in March of the previous year, 3 months after the mine played out and the first families started packing. We'd had 19 years together and 430 head of cattle at the peak and a house with a proper parlor, and then the mine closed and the water table shifted and the whole thing unwound like rope coming off a spool. She got sick in November, was gone by March. I stayed. Seemed simple enough when it was only me to reckon with. My name is Caleb Dorr. I was 56 years old when Clara Mabry stepped off that stage. A widower 2 years running. 6 feet, 180, all of it worn down from what it used to be. I'd been a decent cattleman and I was still a competent carpenter, and I could read the weather better than most, and those were the things I had to offer the world. Not the kind of man a 28-year-old woman from Columbus, Ohio comes to a frontier town expecting to find, which suited me fine because I wasn't offering anything. But I got her settled, fixed the stove in the kitchen, which had been cold since February, and made a fire and put on coffee. Found a can of salt pork in the stores I'd been keeping and made it with hardtack and apologies. She sat at the kitchen table and ate like she hadn't eaten since Flagstaff, which she later told me was true. She was not what I'd pictured when I'd heard the words Maylord or bride, though I'm not sure what I had pictured. Someone softer, maybe, more uncertain. Clara Mabry was a schoolteacher's daughter from a brick house on the eastern side of Columbus, and she had the bearing that comes from that straight in her chair, clear in her speech, the kind of person who made you want to be more precise about what you said because you felt she'd notice if you weren't. Brown hair, practical hands, a jaw that had some decision in it. She wasn't beautiful in the way a picture makes a woman beautiful. She was something more than that, but it would take me a while to find the word for it. "I need to decide what to do," she said after the food. "You do," I said. "The stage comes back through in 10 days. "Thursday and Sunday," I said. "Next one's Thursday." "That's 4 days." "It is." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and looked at the window. Outside was dark by then, the kind of dark you only get when there are no other lights within 10 miles. "I don't have family to go back to," she said. "I sold my furniture, I gave up the house." I didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't anything useful to say. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said and looked at me directly. "I'm thinking out loud." "I know," I said. "Think as loud as you need to." She went up to bed not long after. I sat in the kitchen for a while with my coffee, listening to the town, or what was left of it. The sound of a dead place at night is different from a quiet place. It's flatter somehow. No dogs. No voices from down the street. No movement in the livery. Just whined through a gap somewhere in the mercantile wall, a steady low note that I'd stopped hearing after the first month and only noticed now because I was aware of someone else in the building. I took the lantern out to the cemetery at the edge of town the way I did most nights. Margaret's stone was a piece of sandstone I'd cut myself and carved her name into with a cold chisel, Margaretanndoor, which was all it said because everything else I'd wanted to put on it seemed like either too much or not enough. I'd set a small iron fence around it, the kind you find in front of town houses back east. It seemed right to give her that. She'd have liked it. I told her about Clara Mabry. I did that, talked to Margaret at the stone. I'm aware some men would find that peculiar. I'd stopped caring what men found peculiar sometime around the second winter alone. I said there's a woman arrived tonight. Maylord or bride meant for Prentice. You remember Prentice, he ran the dry goods. Ran out in February. Didn't bother to write and tell her not to come. The wind went through the iron fence and made a small sound. I told her I'd put her in the east room, that she seemed solid enough, that I didn't know what she'd decide to do. Then I said, "Don't worry, Maggie," and I meant it as much for myself as for her. The next 4 days were strange in the way that quiet things can be strange when they become less quiet. Clara was up before me the first morning, which startled me when I came downstairs and found the stove already hot and a pot of something on. She'd gone through the stores and found dried beans and made a proper mash with the last of the salt and a piece of dried beef I'd forgotten I had. She handed me a bowl like it was the most natural thing in the world and sat down with her own. "I'm going to look at the town today," she said. "All of it." "There's not much to see," I said. "Then it won't take long." She spent the whole morning walking Harlan's Bluff from one end to the other, and I watched her from various points, from the hotel porch, from up on the hill where I was checking the fence line on the cemetery, from the window of the livery where I was fixing a hinge that had been loose for a month. She went into every building that wasn't boarded shut. She stood in the middle of the street for a long time just looking. She walked out to the edge of town where the houses thinned out and the scrub came back in, and she stood there with the wind moving her skirt, and I thought she might be crying, but when she came back she wasn't. "The schoolhouse is in good shape," she said. "Nothing wrong with the schoolhouse," I said. "Someone kept it up." "I kept it up," I said. She looked at me. "Why?" I told her the truth, because I didn't know what else to do with myself in the evenings, and something that's maintained stays a thing, whereas something left to itself becomes nothing, and I wasn't ready for the whole town to be nothing yet. She nodded slowly, like that answer meant something to her. That afternoon, I worked on the mercantile eave. The wind had worked a rafter loose, and it needed a new scarf joint before the next rain got into it. She came and handed tools up when I needed them without being asked, and she was good at it. She'd watch what I was reaching for and have it ready. At some point, she climbed up on the lower section of the roof herself and held the end of the rafter while I drove the peg, and she held it steady and true without complaint. "You've worked with your hands before," I said. "My father built most of our house," she said. "He believed children should know how." We ate together that evening, and she asked me about the town, how it had been at its best, who had lived there, what the street sounded like in summer. I told her. It had been a real place. 430 residents at the census, 2 churches, a school with 11 students, a doctor who was also the dentist, a barber who was also something of a lawyer. Margaret had played piano at the Presbyterian church. The mine ran 3 shifts. She listened to all of it the way she had listened to everything, fully present, not performing attention, just having it. "You should have left," she said. "It wasn't unkind, just honest." "Probably," I said. "But you didn't." "No. Because of your wife." I looked at her, among other things. She nodded. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said. "What was she like?" Nobody had asked me that since the burial. Not nobody, a few people had said something kind at the service, but that wasn't the same as asking. Asking means wanting to actually know. I told her Margaret had been funnier than me, which was not a high bar, but she'd cleared it easily. I told her she'd had a way with difficult people, not charming them exactly, more like she just didn't register difficulty as a problem the way most of us do. So difficult people tended to behave better around her than they did elsewhere. I told her she'd once brought a breech-birth calf into the world on her own in the middle of the night, and I hadn't known about it until morning. Clara smiled at that, not a polite smile, a real one. "She sounds wonderful," she said. "She was," I said. "She was the best person in this town." The 3rd day she asked about the water. Not in a sentimental way, not in a curious way, but in a practical way. She'd been reading through papers she'd found in the mayor's office, which had been left unlocked since the mayor departed, and which I'd never bothered going into because the mayor and I had not been friendly. And she'd found surveyor's notes from 5 years prior that referenced a secondary spring west of town that had never been developed. She put the notes on the table in front of me. I looked at them. I'd never heard of the secondary spring. "The town didn't fail because there was no water," she said. "They just stopped looking." "The mine failed," I said. "The mine failed," she agreed. "But if this spring is what the notes say it is, there's enough water for crops, not mining, crops." I looked at her for a while. "You're thinking about staying?" I said. She met my eyes directly. "I'm thinking about whether there's a reason to stay," she said. "That's a different thing." We found the spring the next morning, her and me, walking 2 miles due west with the surveyor's notes and a stick and a compass. It was tucked in under a limestone shelf, a narrow shelf that I'd ridden past probably a dozen times over the years without noticing what was underneath it. The flow wasn't much, a thin braided seam working its way into the earth, but it was constant, and it was cold, and it hadn't quit when everything else did. She crouched down and put her fingers in it. "It's enough," she said. I crouched beside her. We were close. I could smell the trailed dust on her coat and the faint soap smell underneath it. "It's enough for what?" I said. "It's still a dead town." "It's a sleeping town," she said. "There's a difference." I didn't know whether I believed that. I'd been calling it dead for most of 2 years. But she was saying it without whimsy, the way a surveyor says a thing, and I found I wanted to hear more of what she was seeing. On the ride back, she was quiet for a while, then she said, "I'm going to write some letters." "To who?" "A family in Flagstaff that I met on the stage. They were looking for land, and a man in Columbus who I know is trying to start fresh somewhere west." She looked at the road, "and 1 or 2 others." I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure what to say. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "I just want to tell you what I'm thinking." "All right," I said. "Tell me what you're thinking." She told me. The whole of it took most of the ride back, and it was practical and detailed, and not a single word of it was foolish. She had thought about the layout of the lots. She had thought about what crops would grow given the soil and the altitude and the new water. She had thought about the schoolhouse and who could teach and what they'd need. She had thought about the hotel, the Callaway, which was structurally sound, I'd told her that, which meant it needed maintenance, not reconstruction, and what it would take to make it run again. By the time we got back to town, I was looking at the street differently. Maybe that's not exactly true. Maybe I'd been looking at it differently since she'd arrived, but I hadn't let myself notice. She wrote her letters that afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with my pen and ink and the straightest handwriting I'd seen since Margaret used to sit at that same table writing to her sister in Richmond. I kept working on the eve. Later, I checked the fencing on the cemetery and walked the south pasture line, and I thought about nothing in particular, which was usually how I did my best thinking. At supper, I said, "The spring will need a proper cistern to make it useful." "It will," she said. "I know how to build one," I said. She looked at me, a certain kind of careful. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, and then I added because I wanted to be plain about it. "I was never going anywhere, but I want you to know it for the right reasons. Not because I'm stuck here and you happen to arrive, because I think what you're thinking might actually be a thing." She put her fork down. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you've been thinking out loud at me for 4 days, and I thought I ought to return the favor." There was a silence, and then something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, something quieter than that. She picked her fork back up. "All right," she said. The Thursday stage came. She was not on it. She came and stood with me at the edge of the street, and we watched it go, and neither of us said anything about it, because there was nothing that needed saying. What there was to say came in the weeks after in pieces, the way things do when two people are working alongside each other in a small dead town, and there's no one else to talk to, and the days are long, and the evenings are longer. She told me about Columbus, about the schoolteacher father and the practical mother and the 2 brothers who were both already settled and not looking for her to come home. She told me about Aldous Prentice, which wasn't much. She'd corresponded with him for 4 months, and he'd seemed earnest and had a photograph that looked like a decent man, and she'd made a decision based on less information than she'd have liked, which was the only kind of decision the situation allowed. She said she didn't think badly of him. She just thought he could have written. I told her he was a small man in some ways and a decent man in others. That was the most honest accounting I could give. She told me about the students she'd taught before she left Ohio. Privately, unofficially, in her father's schoolhouse on Saturday mornings, children from the Polish neighborhood whose English was not yet steady. She told me she'd liked that work in a way she hadn't been able to explain to anyone back home. They needed someone to take them seriously, she said. Not to talk down to them, not to be patient with them the way people are patient with things they don't think will amount to much, just to talk to them like they'd get there. "Did they get there?" I said. "Most of them," she said, "yes." The first family arrived in April. The Stanhopes from Flagstaff, Lars and his wife Edna and their 3 boys, all under 10, loud and fine and deeply interested in everything. Lars was a carpenter and a farmer, and he had a team of horses that looked better than anything I'd seen in the territory. They took one look at the building stock and immediately started talking about which house they'd take. Edna went straight to the mercantile and started making notes about what would need to be ordered. Clara showed them the survey of the spring. Lars put his hands on his knees and stared at the water for a long time and then straightened up. "Yeah," he said, "this works." We broke ground on the cistern in May. Lars and me and a young man named Terrence who'd arrived from Santa Fe with nothing but a bedroll and a good work ethic, and a story he wasn't volunteering. Clara organized the schedule. She had a natural feeling for what needed to happen in what order and who was best suited to which part, and nobody minded it because she was right. More people came. By June there were 11. By August there were 30. They came the way people come to a thing that seems like it might work, carefully at first, then faster. A doctor arrived in September, a retired Army man named Haverson who didn't want to be called doctor but was one. A woman named Sadie took over the hotel kitchen, and it was better for it. The minister who'd had the Presbyterian church before came back to check on the building, and then stayed. I kept the cemetery. Nobody else understood why I did it, which was fine. The new arrivals had their own business. One evening in October late, I was up on the hill above the cemetery. The town below was lit. Not many lights, 11 windows or so, but after almost 2 years of none, 11 felt like a city. The sound carried up two, a dog, two voices, somewhere a child. Clara came up the hill. I'd seen her coming from a ways off, which gave me a moment to decide whether to be bothered by the company or glad of it. I was glad of it. I'd known I would be for a while. She came and stood beside me and looked at the lights. "Lars says the cistern will hold through winter," she said. "It will," I said. "He built it right." "Because you showed him how." "I showed him the start of it," I said. "He figured the rest." We stood there a while. The air was cold. Real fall cold, the kind that has some meaning in it. "I think about staying," she said. "I think about it all the time now, not as a question, more as a settled thing." I looked at her. "You've been settled since February," I said. "You were settled the day you didn't get on the Thursday stage." She smiled, not the careful one. The real one, the one from the first night with the story about the calf. "I want to be honest about something," she said. "All right," I said. "When I came here, I didn't come for you. I didn't even know you. I came because I'd made a decision, and I followed it." She paused. "But somewhere between the roof and the spring and the cistern and all the rest of it, I stopped being here because of a decision I'd made in Ohio. I started being here because of where I was." She looked at the town. "And because of who was already in it." I didn't know what to do with that for a moment. It had been a long time since someone had said something to me that needed to be received carefully. "Clara," I said. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I just wanted you to know." "I know," I said. "I know you don't need me to say anything back, but I'm going to anyway." She looked at me. "When you stepped off that stage," I said, "I was on a roof fixing a shingle. I had been doing the same 4 or 5 things over and over for 2 years. Fixing what broke, keeping what could be kept, going up to that stone at night and talking to a woman who couldn't hear me anymore." I stopped. "I was doing all of it so it would still be here. I never entirely knew for who. I told myself for Margaret, and that was part of it. But I think I was keeping it for someone I didn't know yet. And then there you were." The wind moved through the iron fence below us. "I'm not a young man," I said. "And I'm not a simple one. I've got a bad knee and a lot of years of quiet that have made me not always easy to be around, and I know that." "I know that too," she said. "But I am the man who kept this town alive long enough for you to do what you did with it. And I'm the man who built that cistern and fixed that Eve, and I will be here when the next windstorm comes and the one after that." I looked at her. "If you want that, if that's worth something to you." She was quiet a moment. Then she stepped forward and put both her hands on the lapels of my coat, the way a person does when they want to make sure you're paying attention, and she looked up at me in the light of the 11 windows below, and she said, "It's worth everything to me. You are worth everything to me." She was not a sentimental woman. She didn't say things she didn't mean. I'd been certain of that since the first hour. I put my arms around her. She leaned in against my chest, and we stood up there on the hill above the cemetery and above the lit-up town, and I felt something release in me that had been wound tight for 2 years, maybe longer, maybe since Margaret got sick and I didn't know how to save her, maybe since the whole thing started unwinding and I could feel it going and couldn't stop it. Not grief exactly, though that was in it. More like a man who has been holding a weight for so long he stopped knowing he was holding it, and then someone comes and stands beside him, and the weight becomes something other than a weight. Below us, the dog barked at something. One of the Stanhope boys laughed, the oldest one, Thomas, who had a laugh that carried. A window went warm. We stood there until it was fully dark and the stars were out overhead. Big and cold, and particular the way they get at altitude in October. And she was still against me, and I could feel her breathing. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. We just stayed. That was the beginning of what came after, and what came after was good. I won't give you all of it. Some of it belongs to us. What I'll say is this. The town grew, and Clara ran most of that growth with the particular combination of patience and decision that she'd always had, and I kept the structures standing and the water moving and the cemetery clean, and somewhere in all of it we became the kind of pair that people in a town come to rely on without quite saying so. The rock and the builder. The keeper and the planner. Margaret's stone stays where it is. Clara has been up to it with me more than once. The first time she went, she just stood there a while and didn't say anything, and then she said, quietly, not to me, "Thank you for keeping him here. I pretended I didn't hear that, but I heard it. Harlan's bluff is still there. You can find it if you know where to look. Population last count 114. There's a schoolhouse, it's full. And in the east room of the Callaway, the one with the morning light, there's still a wash basin and a good mattress and the ghost of a woman who stepped off a stagecoach into nothing and decided it was enough to build on. She was right. She usually is.